Tonight we're doing a second lecture called German Madness in the Middle Ages, Part 1. And last time we concentrated, as you saw, on the beginnings of these unfortunate phenomena, which are, I remind you, are still with us today. The blood libels and specifically, and similar accusations. And they took place in France and in that colony of France at that time called England, because in the after 1066, England was for quite a while a colony of France because it was ruled by French kings and in the Plantagenets. Now, the scene shifts to Germany, which in the Middle Ages was called the Holy Roman Empire. Let's take a look at the first slide. And as you can see over here in the map, it's a lot bigger than Germany today. There was a single state that for many centuries occupied the whole of Central Europe. Look how big it is. What you see is all Germany, a big chunk of France today, is Switzerland, is a lot of Italy. Do you notice, and this will be part of our story, that really the Holy Roman emperors, especially during the time I'm going to be speaking about, had all of Italy except the middle. The middle was called the Papal States because the idea was that it's very unclear, and there are a lot of lies about this, but Charlemagne, when the Pope crowned him as Holy Roman Emperor, said, I'll give you a chalik of Italy for you to run as your own little kingdom. And for centuries, there were battles between emperors versus popes over how much of this the Pope should rule, and should he rule everything under the emperor, or should the emperor be under him because he's the religious one, and so forth. So, and there's the Czech Republic. So the Holy Roman Empire was quite a large area, even though it had nothing to do with the old Roman Empire of classical times. And why am I interested in this? A lot of Jews lived there. In fact, Ashkenazic Jews means that Jews live in France and in this. Again, the term Ashkenaz in Jewish talk means the Jews who live here in France and here primarily, somewhere or other in what you call the Germany, but that's called the Holy Roman Empire. I would repeat before I move on, a lot of what they call France today at that time was really part of Germany, which is why you've had all these wars over centuries. Just to give you an example, Alsace, Lorraine, places like that, were German territories. They're part of the Holy Roman Empire for many years until French aggression conquered and added it to France. So Europe has its history of stealing and grabbing. That doesn't stop the French from being holier than thou till today, but welcome to Europe. Now, that means that for many centuries, the Jews live under what they call the imperial system, the system of the Holy Roman Empire. And the problem is that even though I picked a map which shows you the whole blob, really it's a whole bunch of little medinas, a whole bunch of little states ruled by the Duke of this and the Prince of that, and everybody would like to be his own ruler. A lot of them would like to be the emperor themselves. And the guy on top has to sit on them. From the Jewish point of view, they always want a strong emperor. Because the Jews, and this is true till today, always require a strong government. And if you want to know why they require a strong government, look at Europe right now. They can't stop the riots attacking the synagogues. The Jews don't want that. They want a country in which nobody can run amok in the streets, and if they do, the police come out in big force and stop them. Okay? We have a president in American history, William McKinley. One of the reasons he became president because when he was governor of Ohio, it was a big labor strike, and he called out like 50,000 soldiers, and like a gigantic amount, and then the rioters went away. And he said very famously, when the government has to appear, it has to appear in the form of a monster. Okay? So notice that usually it's better, let's have no soldiers at all, correct? Let's have nice and quiet. But if it's necessary, you got to do it. You can't just have a little here and there. And if you're Jewish, particularly then, if there's not a strong law and order, as the Pirkei Avos puts it, Ish Yisrael Chaim B'Ohu, then people get swallowed up by the neighbor. In this case, the minority will get swallowed up by the Christian majority. That's the way it goes. And so the Jews always prefer a strong emperor, if possible, or at least a strong local ruler for the purpose of law and order. However, there were almost insurmountable difficulties of being a strong emperor over such a huge territory and such a vast and complicated realm. Part of it is in Italy, Part of it is in northern Germany, and part of it is in the central. And every time the emperor suppresses a rebellion in Italy, he's got to run back to Germany, and so on and so forth. And the princes can get together and maneuver and organize against him, and then he's got to organize the other princes against them. This, what I just described, is what happened through most of the Middle Ages. In the period we're talking about, where the first incident that we're going to be directing our attention to tonight happened, it was a time when there was a fairly strong imperial system. In the 1100s was one of the most famous strong German emperors, Frederick Barbarossa, okay? Who is actually famous in German history because there were a lot of people who tried to revolt, and he crushed it, and he imposed a single rule, and one of the things he said was, I guess, you leave the Jews alone, because they belong to me, right? It's my bees, and they make my honey, so get your stinking hands off of them. And the Jews were happy about this. You get it? That's what they need. There's no democracy over here. If it was up to democracy, local demagogues, as we'll see, will organize the locals to kill the Jews. So the Jews can't afford a democracy in that sense, right? We're not talking about Thomas Jefferson over here. And so what you need is a strong person at the top who, perhaps for his own pocketbook reasons, will enforce law and order. And during the 12th century, as they call it, the Jews had it okay. They practiced their religion. They even developed the whole Torah culture. They had communication with one another. And the Christian population left them alone because you could get in trouble for breaking the law. By the 1200s, the empire is really being torn apart by fights between the emperor versus the nobles, and the fights between the emperor and the pope, as I just described before. Because who's the top dog? The Pope always says like this: you are under God and I'm God, or I'm the representative of God over here, so kiss my feet. And I mean that. And by the way, many times the emperor had to kiss the Pope's feet. And it's a very famous incident in the late 1000s in the battle, when Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV had a machlokas with the Pope at that time, and the result was that the Pope won, and he had to go to the castle in Canossa in northern Italy in the middle of the winter and walk around barefoot around the castle till the Pope deigned to come out and let him kiss his feet. There were other times when the guys strung up the Pope, All depends how strong the different rulers are. The Jews, as I told you, have a good position in imperial law. They have the right to religious and economic freedom and security. But the local priests, as I told you last time, cannot abide this. And they influence the masses, or they poison the masses. So the Jews, and this is the problem in Europe today, make it their business to be tight with the guys at the top. But that's important, no question. But the guys at the bottom are the ones there on the street. And the guys at the street level, the ones who's the priest in the local church and the local parish, is not interested in the fact that the archbishop and the popes and all those guys are tight with the Jews because of business reasons. And they are, moved by their own Christian passion, and they want to communicate this at the local sermon in the local church. And the result is a toxic environment. And anyway, everybody wants to harm the Jews because everybody owes them money. So if you kill them, you don't owe them any money. That's an unfortunate economic reality of the Middle Ages. We will come back to that. You get it? When the Jews are in the business of financing, lending, investing, it's a fact. If you kill them all, you don't owe them any money. It's hard to take away that temptation. Now, in Norwich and Blois, that we talked about last week, the Jews were accused of killing a Christian child. But if you pay close attention, there was no mention of the matzah, meaning there was no blood libel in the classic sense that we described as it's going to emerge, that the Jews, as part of a religious ritual, shecht a Christian kid, or better yet, crucify him and pierce him and squeeze out the blood, and to use it in baking of matzahs and other ritual acts. As we saw, they had some kind of a proto-version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, if those of you were here for our first talk, and something about sacrificing a child or whatever, but it didn't exactly develop in the way that we think of it, because since it's a made-up item, it's got to evolve sort of organically within the European Christian culture. In 1235, in Fulda, such charges are leveled, or at least that the Jews murder kids because they need their blood for some religious reason. Fulda is a town smack in the middle in the belly button of Germany, right? There's Germany today. So you see where it is. It's a small town, and the Jews lived in those years primarily in South and Central Germany, which was a economically good area, but the environment very tough, very hostile towards Jews. And to give you the basic details, according to the Dominican analyst at Erfurt, Jews of Fulda were accused of killing a bunch of boys. What happened specifically was as follows, that there were a number of mills, where they grind wheat. There were several mills, and on Christmas Day of 1235, the miller of one of the mills and his wife went to church in town. When they were gone, the mill burned down, and the bodies of their 5 sons were found in the ruins. So it was a tragedy. The family went to church, the parents, and there was a fire in the house, and everybody got killed. It was a sad day for the miller and his wife, but it was a much sadder day for the 34 Jews who lived there, and for millions of Jews thereafter. According to the famous account, now this is a Christian account, the Jews of Fulda were accused of killing the boys. That's weird. It was a fire. Right? I mean, you saw the charred bodies. They confessed that 2 of them had killed the boys and drawn off their blood into waxed bags. And on the 28th of December, that's 3 days after Christmas, 34 Jews were cruelly killed. According to the Erfurt analyst, that's the Christian chronicler, they were killed by crusaders, but someone else says they were killed by the citizens of Fulda. Now this gives you an idea of the irrational nature of this kind of act, but that doesn't matter for the victims. It's pretty clear what happened over here. It's not a ritual act. The kids didn't disappear and, all of a sudden found drained of blood like in some Dracula movie or something like that. It was a fire. And it's a tragedy, no question about it. Now, how did it move from A to B to C to D that when you see, a fire happen, that you end up calling it that's what you call word of mouth, isn't it? He said, one says, they burned in the fire. The other one said, well, I don't know if they burned in the fire. I heard it was a little bit different. And then it comes to the telephone, and the next one says it this way, the next one says that way. And ordinarily, we would sort of laugh and talk about the folly of rumors and things like that. There's nothing funny about folly and rumors in the Middle Ages for Jews. That's the problem. It's not funny. Because by the time the story gets legs and picks up steam, it's, the Jews killed the kids and then threw them into the house and burned it down to make it look like a fire. So that's probably how it worked out. They said, how did the whole family get killed in a fire? The answer is, they didn't all get killed in a fire. They were killed somewhere else, thrown, and then the house was deliberately burned down to cover the whole thing up. Now, we weren't there. We don't know what kind of a trial, if you want to call it those words, happened. But we know that this is what happens over here. And it gives no... notice the story. It says they took the blood and put them into bags. It doesn't say exactly why they wanted the blood, but another analyst says later on that they did it ad summum remedium, which in Latin means that they went for some kind of medicinal or perhaps religious medicinal reason. Okay? Now, the thing is that this was a big shock, because it never happened in Germany before. Isn't that interesting what I'm telling you? Here you are in the year 1235, and throughout the Middle Ages beforehand, Germany was not a place that they loved Jews, but there was never any kind of blood libel. And there was never any kind of situation that we know about in which some Christian kids were killed, 1 or 2 or 3 or more, and the Jews were blamed. Why would the Jews do it? You see? And then all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, this very weird and unbelievable story happened, because I just described to you, it was a fire. And so, do you understand what I'm saying? It's not like, someone was found somewhere, with his head chopped off, and then they say, the Jews did it, or something like that. It was extremely implausible, but none of that matters. And the local priests, obviously, helped create this kind of narrative. And unfortunately, as you and I know today, right now, we're giving this talk in the middle of the war that Israel is fighting with the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. He who puts the spin on the story wins the PR prize, correct? Wins the PR war. It's all how you spin it. And this is a story of spin. And the Arabs, if they could, would spin it in such a way to kill us now. What else is new? But this is happening in a very specific, and in this case a Christian way, in the 13th century, in the year 1235. Now here, something very unusual happens. This could have really mushroomed into a frenzy that could have swept all throughout Germany and Europe and killed everybody. I mean, it was that close. And the Jews are defenseless against this because all you can say is, I didn't do it. And, that's never an argument. So certainly when you have an angry crowd. But the cast of characters is all important over here. Let me just read you a piece over here where the chronicler, the German chronicler says, in order to incite the emperor against the crime, right, they said, we want to make this national news. And we want the Kaiser, the Holy Roman Emperor, to find out about it and kill all the Jews. The boys' bodies were brought to Fulda to the great imperial, from Fulda to the great imperial castle at Hagenau, 150 miles away. So they wrapped up the bodies and schlepped them 150 miles. Think about what that means in December in Germany. And there the bodies were brought to Hagenau, is supported by the later account, and so on and so forth. And the emperor wasn't there at that time, but they said he's going to wait till they bring him back. Well, fortunately for the Jews, the emperor at that particular moment was perhaps the most remarkable of all the Holy Roman emperors, Frederick II, who is a Parsha B'fnei Atzmo. The Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, is a very well-known figure, perhaps the most controversial and famous, very interesting figure in the Middle Ages, because he was emperor for a long time, from the time he was a baby, from 1 year old, 2 years old. I mean that because of his father and all this. And he constantly battled the popes. He captured Jerusalem from the Muslims for a while. He had wars galore, but he also was an enormous patron of the arts. And here you had a very rare case where he was a brilliant intellectual. Usually German princes are not intellectuals, because the talents it takes for one don't necessarily match the other. In his particular case, he had a guy who spoke like 8 languages, was familiar with all kinds of different traditions and cultures, extremely unusual in the Middle Ages. And because from the early age on, he had to deal with politics with the popes and the Vatican, and they're always trying to shaft him, and he's trying to shaft them, he developed early on a big skepticism. And so, let's put it this way, he was definitely the most radical skeptic in the Middle Ages, and he wrote a book, incognito, the title called The Three Great Imposters. The Three Great Imposters. Moses, Jesus, Muhammad. Okay? Now, he couldn't sign his name, but everybody knew he wrote it. And what does that tell you? He said, don't give me this business about the Pope. And all religion is a crock, right? It's all there out to manipulate the masses and all the rest of it. And only somebody with a very wide education in the 13th century would have that perspective, okay? And so he'll go along with all the Catholic stuff because he's the emperor, but you're not fooling anybody, so to speak. And he liked educated people from all backgrounds. And he creates an imperial court in Sicily. That's where he liked to hang out. If you go to Sicily today, they have these famous palaces where he created a very cosmopolitan court, unique in the Middle Ages, in which he had all kinds of scholars from all over the place, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. This is just not done. And philosophers, astronomers, poets, writers, which I say scientists, whatever that meant in the 13th century, including, by the way, a very famous rabbi, maybe he's not so famous to you, Yaakov Anatoli, the Malmud HaTalmidim, wrote a very famous commentary, philosophical commentary on the Bible. Yaakov Anatoli is an extreme Maimonidean, knows a left-wing, extreme left-wing Orthodox that we would say today, and everything in the Bible is not literal. You get it? Now when it says this and this over here, it's a mashal that bears this philosophical message. And the Orthodox didn't like him too much, okay? But he's absolutely typical of the court of Frederick II. You get it? Because a guy like Frederick II, you're talking about Jesus and all this, well, you really think it was a guy like that? Come on, it's just a way of talking for the rubes. What really happened was such and such and so on and so. So the Malmud HaTalmidim is very much a reflection of that unique piece of culture at that time. When the highly educated and highly cultured Frederick, so you understand what I'm trying to get across? You have a mass of Germans who are asses, right? The masses are asses. They don't know anything. They're ignorant. They're peasants. They believe whatever they take in the church, and they take it all literally. And they certainly, as Catholics, believe that this is the body and the blood of Christ. and the whole 9 yards, and plus witches and demons and so forth. And here comes the emperor, who said, I guess, I'm looking at the biggest bunch of rubes that ever walked down the road, you know? When the highly educated and cultured Frederick hears that the Jews in Fulda have been killed and others are being brought up on charges because they want to use Christian blood in Jewish ceremonies, he basically says, say, what now? You know, what's this? Okay? I know what Judaism is. I don't know the Talmud, but I know what Judaism is. I know what Islam is too. I told you, he was unusually educated. Determined to get to the bottom of this rumor, both out of his own curiosity, as well as out of a desire to avoid an imperial Kristallnacht. Right? He doesn't want a bunch of riots sweeping all across Germany. Frederick writes to the monarchs of Europe and to the Pope. And he says, we have letters from Henry of England, for example. Have you ever heard about the Jews? I mean, wanting to use blood for the matzahs. Look, I know the Jews are stupid in this way, and they dress funny, and they got all these crazy customs. There's no question about it. Listen, we're as weird as they come, you know. But on the other hand, you ever heard about this? But they use the blood for matzah? Well, what is it? And the kings of England and France and other countries, they like this. Same thing. He said, no, I never heard of that one. Again, I mean, the Jews are low life, they're scuzzballs, you know, there's so on and so forth, you know, who wants to be a Jew? And so, but I never heard of that. I never heard of that one. He writes to the Pope, I never heard of that one. And so he says, I'm going to nip this one in the bud. Simply because it is part of his nature to, you know, what shall I say, fight against dangerous superstitions when the opportunity presents itself. And so what he does is he gathers very quickly, by the way, in the course of a few months, he gathers an international convention of Mishmarim. He summons Jews who converted to Catholic from all over the place, from Germany, from France, and other places, to a castle. And these are people who have left the Jewish religion. These are people who spit on the Jewish religion. These are people who moved away from Judaism to embrace Catholicism in the Middle Ages. What do they think of Jews? And by the way, a lot of people, why would a Jew typically convert to Catholicism in the Middle Ages? Consider what I'm about to tell you. A Jew brought up in a Jewish tradition is now going to embrace a religion in which you eat the body and the blood of the Savior. It's very paganistic. It's very strange to a Jewish sensibility. We're not talking about converting to Unitarianism or something like that, right? We're talking about to medieval Catholicism. So why would a Jew do that? First of all, there's always romance, right? That works. Boy meets girl. No, I'm serious. You know, that'll always be, always was, always will be. The Jewish books are full of such stories. And that could happen. A lot of times, the Jewish guy's in bad trouble with the Jewish community. He was caught stealing. He's caught committing a crime. The Jewish community is going to go after him. They're going to whip him. They're going to jail him. Or something. You can always get out of it by converting. You understand what I'm saying? If I'm a Jew in the 1200s, even if I murder another Jew, so murder is a crime in Germany. If I murder another Jew, if I run to the Christian court and I say like this, he says, I'm willing to convert, and so I'm newborn, so I'm not the guy that did it, that was a bad old me when I was a Jew, but now I'm somebody new. You will be exonerated, plus you also get a couple $100. So, no, I mean, this really is the reality. Listen, there's a whole Jewish, what should I say? We Jews have no choice but to try to turn the sad circumstances of our lives over centuries into humor. Right? What choice do we have? So there's a classic story from the old country, Eastern Europe, in which a guy, how's it work now? He says a guy needed money, and so he went to the church, and they gave, he converted, gave him $50. And then a week later, he went to another area, and he converted, gave him another $50, and so forth and so on. Finally, they got wise, and they put out a circular, don't take this guy in. Next church he went to, they said, no deal. He said, a bunch of anti-Semitic, but the Jews turned this into what it is. Now, these are people who do not feel good about Judaism. But the Emperor Frederick calls them in and he said like this, I know you don't like Judaism, I don't like Judaism, it's stupid, this, that, and the other. But here's the question. Do they use Christian blood in Jewish rituals? Is it part of the Jewish religion, a secret part, to kill Christians and use the blood? And they all said no. He said, we think Judaism is bad in this way, and it's bad in that way, and we've rejected it by our own life story, and all the rest of it, but they don't do that. You see? And then Frederick basically said, I guess, then case closed. It's what I thought. It's some local guy, for local reasons, took advantage of a fire of 5 kids to go blame the local Jews, and maybe he owed them money. Maybe he was angry at them for some other reason. Maybe the Jew was stupid and made fun of him sometime or other. It's a local reason, but it's not a religious and theological one. And as a result, he issues an imperial law prohibiting making such charges. Interesting, right? He said, no, it becomes a crime to issue such charges because it's so potentially deadly. It works. It's a bomb. It's equivalent to shouting a fire in a theater. You understand? If you stand up in a town in Germany, in the Holy Roman Empire, and say the Jews killed a Christian kid, it's going to be a pogrom. And something that lethal and with such potential of violence, he said, I won't have it. And so he issues, as I say before, an imperial decree doing so, and he officially legislates. It's a famous point in Jewish history, 1235, that the Jews are the personal property of the Treasury Department of the Emperor. You understand? They belong to the Treasury Department, the Servi Nostri Camere. They're servants of our chamber, which in effect makes the Treasury Department. If you know your American history, you know that we've had colonies in the past, right? And I remember the Navy Department owned Puerto Rico once upon a time. The Army owned Hawaii, if you remember that, if you go back that far. I forget who owned Alaska. They farmed it out to the departments. And the Treasury Department owns some cargo as well, and things of this nature. And in the way they set up at that time was this belongs to the... So you can't touch a Jew because it's government property. That's the point. Now, Halavai, this should have worked. It didn't work. But at least he did something. Did it help? Within a decade, the Jews in Valréas are accused by 2 monks of crucifying a child and taking his blood for religious purposes. Valréas, as you see, is down here in South France, not far from the border of the Holy Roman Empire. And it's not exactly in the empire, it's right near the border. And the 2 monks basically have the attitude, well, are they really going to punish me for killing Jews? See, this is the problem. Are they really going to punish me for making a pogrom? If 3 people attack a shul, maybe they'll get arrested. If 30,000 people attack a shul, who can you arrest? You see, you will get away with it. And so they are accused, let's put it this way, the Jews are accused of crucifying a child, taking his blood for religious purposes. A bunch of Jews are arrested, tried, and killed. The other Jews, who were, we don't know exactly why, not seized yet, they immediately run to get word to the Pope, Innocent IV, who fortuitously was nearby in France, forced out of Italy by Frederick II. So here's Pope Innocent, who's actually a pretty well-known person in Jewish history. Talked about him a couple years ago. And let's go to the next map. Do we have the map there? No, it's one before. Let's precede it. Go back to the Pope. Valréas is in South France. The Pope was in Lyon. Lyon is like 95 miles away. And so usually the Pope's in Rome. But as I told you before, if you know your Middle Ages well, there were a lot of fights between the Pope and the Emperor. And at many times, the emperors beat up the popes. And in the case of Frederick II, if you want to know about the fights that he had with the Pope, Innocent IV, he made it so hot in Italy that the Pope couldn't be in Italy, and he ran away to south of France. Some of you perhaps have been tourists, and you visit Avignon and places like that in southern France, which was once upon a time a papal territory. And to make a long story short, the Pope was not far away. Now, this particular Pope was not so bad. That's why I say he's a famous person in Jewish history, although I don't expect people here to remember the different medieval popes. And they said they're accusing us of killing children to use their blood for religious purposes. The Pope Innocent IV issued a remarkable bull, a papal statement, a psak halacha, as we would say today, trying to drive a stake through the heart of the blood libel. It's quite interesting. Take a look at the language. I only have it over here. I can't see it so well over here. But if you look at the language, he says, we've heard the tearful plea of the Jews of Germany, and he goes on to say, if you take a trouble to read the words, that this is a cockable story. It's all made up. and that the Jews are being made to suffer worse than in Germany than the Jews in the Bible did under Pharaoh. That's what he says over here, okay? And that this is the result of greed and avarice on the part of the local Germans. And knows, I know what's going on. And he's a pope, so he's not pro-Jewish, okay? But on the other hand, he is maintaining the Vatican tradition, the St. Augustine tradition. And that is that the Jews perhaps should not thrive, but they should survive. And therefore, to kill them on false charges simply because you don't like the local Jews is contrary to the teachings of the church. If you told me that you were going to put economic disabilities upon them, prevent them from going to different trades or whatever, no, that's something that's up to the local princes, right? If you want to tell me you want to prohibit the Jews from charging interest, that's a matter of local conditions. But if you talk about killing people and killing people on a charge that's just not true, and he goes on to read over there, as I say, I can't see it from over here. Read, he says, the Jews in their own religion avoid blood. He says, I know this. It's not part of their culture. And you and I know that we salt meat and things like this to get rid of the blood. And so to make this kind of a charge is just wrong. Now, this is pretty impressive coming from the Pope. Right? Coming from the Pope. Is it really mazel for these Jews, few survivors in that little town in southern France, that the Pope literally happened to be nearby? If he was in Italy and Rome, they'd be toast, because they never get to him. And so we end up within a very short time, in the 1200s, of getting something very significant. The Holy Roman Emperor, the highest Christian ruler in Europe, and the Pope, who is the supreme authority in the Catholic Church, both came out officially saying the blood libel is a lie. And as the Gemara puts it, if not for these official and very important statements, all the Jews would have been killed long, long ago. It didn't stop the popping up of blood libels here and there and there and there for the next couple hundred years, but it did prevent a general massacre of the Jews to which they would have been exposed, because the Christians wouldn't listen, and it would sweep from one priest to the next priest, and it would be all over. So it's kind of interesting that with the very rise, for the first time ever, officially of charges, that the Jews are taking blood and using their ceremonies, you get a refutation and a public official denial by the highest Christians, the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope, saying that whoever says these charges are lies. Notice, they didn't say these particular Jews didn't do it, maybe others did it. They say we know enough about Judaism to know that the Jews have a lot of bad habits and they have a lot of bad beliefs, and obviously they kill Jesus and they don't believe in Christianity and all the rest. All that's bad, and they're all going straight to hell and so on and so forth. But they don't do this. And anybody who says they do this is telling a lie, and therefore doing it for malicious reasons, and I know why you're doing it. You're doing it for the money, or you're doing it for some other local reason. Now, as I said, I wish this would have had the effect of driving a stake through the heart of this whole charge. But it didn't. Now you'll ask me a question, why? If everybody's so frum, if they're such big Catholics, the Pope gave a pronouncement. That should end the story. Not really. Because at the local level, at the local parish priest, this statement by the Pope was so, what's the right word, counterintuitive. It was so anomalous. It's so much the opposite of what they expected to hear. They were absolutely sure the Pope would say, I guess, go for it, baby. We found that the Jews are doing this, and wipe them out. That they couldn't handle it. They couldn't absorb it. And they could only come to the conclusion, Nebuch, the world's in bad shape. The Jews have bought off the Pope. You understand? That's the only reason, yeah? They bought him off. You get it? Now, you'll ask me a question. He asked me a question, how can you respect somebody that was bought off by the Jews? The Gedolim are not perfect. What can I tell you? It's like that's the attitude that they say, even the Pope and the Nebuch, whatever. But we know better. And he was, you might say, I guess, the Jews forced him against his will, or they overwhelmed him with pressure. But really, 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 he wants us to kill the Jews in this particular neighborhood or particular village. And how do you fight against that? You understand? In 1255, so I went to 1235, 1236, now 1255, also in the middle of 1200s, another charge popped up in England. Right, so we saw the first business started with William of Norwich in the 1100s, now you have the 1200s. In England, it's a sad story. England was, listen closely to what I'm about to tell you, England was the number one anti-Semitic country in Europe in the Middle Ages. Isn't that interesting? You don't think of it that way, because the English later changed and became much more liberal. But in the time of Richard the Lionheart and all that, Henry II, King John, the people that you perhaps have heard about or seen in novels and in movies, at that time, the feeling of the Hamon Ham, of the masses of people, was extremely anti-Semitic, much more than in Spain, even much more than in France, where it was bad news in France, and much more than in Germany. Germany was more liberal than France and England. Consider that. And this is reflected in the fate of the Jews in England because, as I mentioned the other day, the Jews first came to England with William the Conqueror in 1066, being of service to the Normans, the rulers. Over the course of the 1100s, the intelligent rulers of the country protected Jews because, like I said, it was their cash cow. The classic example being Henry II, who nevertheless made it his business. He took care of the Jew. But anytime a Jewish millionaire died, he took all the money. He said, well, listen, you got to pay soldiers on payday. You understand? You got to pay for your castles. By the time you get to the 1200s, England doesn't have powerful and strong rulers anymore who feel this way. They have weak rulers, especially Henry III, and Richard II? That doesn't matter. The point is that the mass tendencies of extreme hatred of the Jews manifest themselves in waves. It's like really hard to be Jewish in England. And the government starts a policy like they did in France of ripping off the Jews. You know, they put one tax on them and they do another, and the government, they can get you this way and they get you that way, and they impoverish the Jews of England until you get to the late 1200s when the Jews are all broke, and then they kick them out. Right? Under Edward Longshanks, Edward I. And so, if you're talking about the middle of the 1200s, there are Jews in England, but they're in bad shape. Better move to Spain. Better move to Germany. And in 1255, another charge popped up in England. Hugh of Lincoln. Lincoln was once upon a time it was Aaron of Lincoln. It was a well-known Jewish community. What does it mean, a well-known Jewish community? Probably had 20, 30 families, which once in those days was a big Jewish community. I'll just read you the official account. The 9-year-old Hugh, H-U-G-H, disappeared on 31st July of 1255, and his body was discovered in a well a month later, the end of August. A man named John of Lexington appears to have suggested that the Jews were responsible. Why not? Hugh's friends apparently claimed that Koppen, a local Jew, had imprisoned Hugh, tortured him, and crucified him, and that the body had been thrown into the well because attempts to bury the child had failed when the earth expelled it. See? Koppen then was arrested, the Jewish guy, and admitted to killing the child under torture. Are you aware that torture was part of the judicial process of every legal system in Europe and elsewhere, but especially in Europe, till the 1700s? Yeah, the 1700s. And in England, they even used it for political cases. In Henry VIII's time, they used it a lot. And the idea was, I'll tell you where it comes from. A court has to issue, verdicts. And sometimes it's a harsh verdict. And let's say, for example, the court says that this guy should be killed. You're going to get all the relatives angry at you. And they're going to say he didn't do it. And that the court is therefore judicial murderers. And they might go after the judges. And so there was a huge desire, atavistically, on the part of the judiciary to say like this: he admitted that he did it. We stood up in the court. Of course, he chopped off 3 hands and you burned him alive and all the rest of it, but he said he did it. And that way, when he went to be executed, beheaded or drawn and quartered, whatever it was, before that happened, he would say, I did it. And as far as the crowd is concerned, he said he did it. Now, What about the fact that you forced them into it by the torture? That wasn't as important to them as the fact that the guy confessed and said he did it. When you have a rare case where someone is executed and said, I didn't do it, left a very bad taste on the part of the crowds. If you know the history of the Salem witchcraft trials in New England, they eventually had to stop burning the witches in Salem up in Massachusetts. Why? Because every time they burned them, they said, we didn't do it. And even though the courts had the power and the people couldn't stop them, but pretty soon, the public sentiment was so persuaded that they were committing judicial murders and accusing people of witchcraft, they didn't do it. You couldn't do it anymore. So I'm just trying to show you, judges don't live in an ivory tower or in a castle somewhere. They live in the community. They got to feel this way. The Jewish law was the only system in the Middle Ages, the only system in the Middle Ages that disallowed torture. You're not allowed to use torture in Jewish thing, or maybe I should say better. They didn't use torture, but for a technical reason, not because we're so soft-hearted, but because of the very interesting law in the Talmud that a confession is not admissible in court. And many people don't know that. Okay? You understand what I'm saying? You cannot get a conviction in Jewish law under Talmudic law. You can't get a conviction based on a confession. To use technical language, you have to have two adim. You have two witnesses. And if you can't do it, ain't on a mason matzah Russia, as we call it. And because of that, the Jewish law system never developed a system of physically pressuring the defendants and all the rest of it, which is why in some areas even Christians preferred to go to a Jewish court. You see? But on the other hand, you always had the option of going to the Christian court. So here's this guy Coppin or Joppin, whatever his name was, in Lincoln in 1255, and they say, you did it. Once you're charged, you're going to confess. You'll confess. And so he later appears to have implicated the Jewish community as a whole. In other words, under torture, he said like this: did you crucify the child? Yes. Do you have accomplices? What do you want me to say? The whole Jewish community. The whole Jewish community did it. Well, it hurts. They're torturing him. He was executed, and the story would have ended there if not for a series of events that coincided with the disappearance. 6 months earlier, the King of England, Henry III, had sold his rights to tax the Jews to his brother, Richard, Earl of Cornwall. So this is a very medieval concept. The king owns the Jews, as I told you. King John of England, back in Robin Hood time, King John of England famously said, no one should lay his hand on my Jew or my dog, because it belongs to me. And in that kind of world, the Jew was glad to hear that. That's how low the position of the Jew was at sometimes in the Middle Ages. And the King of England owned the Jews in the sense that the tax money doesn't go local, it goes straight to the king. But that's a concession. You can franchise anything out. And so he sold the right to tax the Jews to his brother, Richard, Earl of Cornwall. Having lost his source of income, he decided he was eligible for the Jews' money if they were convicted of crimes. You get what I'm saying? Notice there was two brothers ripping each other off. I sold you, I'm the king of England. I sold you the right to tax the Jews. But then I can't make any money out of the Jews. But if they're convicted of a crime, then the money goes to the king. You get it? In other words, it's a shameless injustice that we're talking about over here. As a result, 90 Jews were arrested and held in the Tower of London, where they were charged with involvement in ritual murder. Because if he gets to kill them for committing the crime, he gets their money, even though he sold the brother the right to tax them. Such accusations have become increasingly common because, as I told you last time, when William of Norwich disappeared, although nothing happened to the Jews at that time, that priest, Thomas of Monmouth, wrote a whole book saying the Jews got him, and that book had a lot of traction. It was fascinating to read. There weren't too many books in the Middle Ages, and really, changed public opinion. It became an article of faith that it's true, and that William of Norwich was crucified by Jews in 1144, and obviously this influenced the myth around them. 18 Jews were hanged for refusing to participate in proceedings and throw themselves on the mercy of a Christian jury. You get what I'm saying? You didn't confess and do the right thing, so you get hanged. Okay? It was the first time ever that the civil government handed out a death sentence for ritual murder, and then King Henry was able to take all their property. Very nice. The remainder were pardoned and set free, most likely because Richard said, hey, you sold me their taxes. In other words, justice right and wrong, had nothing to do with any of this. And we're not dealing with local duke, count, prince, where you can understand that there's going to be a lot of corruption. The king is always supposed to be above that. The emperor is supposed to, they only steal big money, They don't do these petty, wrong. If the situation is right, you can always get them on this. And if the Jews, and you know this, are not going to be convicted for regular crimes, the Jews don't beat up people, they don't go around murdering, it's not a Jewish thing. You can always get them on the ritual murder. And if you tell me no one witnessed it because it didn't happen, you have no witnesses, we get a confession. How do you get a confession? You always get a confession. And that, my friends, is how things worked in the Middle Ages. The chronicler Matthew of Paris described the supposed murder implicating all the Jews in England. Listen to how somebody wrote it at that time. This year, 1255, around the feast of the apostles Peter and Paul, meeting on 27th of July, the Jews of Lincoln stole a boy named Hugh, who was about 8 years old, after shutting him up in a secret chamber where they fed him milk and other kiddie foods. They sent him to almost all the cities of England where there were Jews, and meaning they send out a message that all the Jews of England should get together and summon all from their sect from each city to be present at the carbon, at the sacrifice that's going to take place in Lincoln, in contumely and insult of Jesus Christ, for they said they had a boy concealed for the purpose of being crucified, so the great number of them assembled at Lincoln. So in other words, according to the story, all the protocols elders, all the Jews of England, or most of them, come to have the festival at Lincoln. And there they appointed Jew of Lincoln, judge, to take the place of Pontius Pilate. So in other words, they're going to reenact the crucifixion of Jesus. That's what gives it, it makes it sexy in the Christian court. That's why when they hear this, they say, oh, the Jews did it. By whose sentence, with the concurrence of all, the boy was subjected to various tortures. Because in the New Testament, they tortured Jesus before they killed him. They scourged him until the blood flowed. They crowned him with thorns, the boy. They mocked him and spat upon him. Each of them pierced him with a knife. And then they made him drink gall and scoffed at him with blasphemous insults and kept gnashing their teeth and calling him Jesus' false prophet. After tormenting him in many ways, they crucified him and pierced his heart with a spear. When he was dead, they took the body down from the cross and for some reason disemboweled it for the purpose of their magic arts. You think of a jury hearing this in 1255 in England. Kill them all. Right? Kill them all. And especially if they got a guy who confessed to what I just described. It's a chamber of horrors. I mean, it's unbelievably evil, these Jews. Thanks, unfortunately, to Chaucer, the story of Hugh Lincoln went viral in English literature in the Prioress Tale. Anybody, I assume everybody, but anybody have to learn Canterbury Tales? And did you, were you in a Jewish school when you had to learn Canterbury Tales? Or were you in a non-Jewish school when you had to get there? If you were in a non-Jewish school when you had to learn Canterbury Tales, wasn't so comfortable, right? Because one of the, Geoffrey Chaucer in the 1300s writes this famous immortal classic of English literature where a bunch of people are on their way to pilgrimage and they're all schmoozing, right? And each one tells a tale. And one of them is the prioress. I mean, she's like the head of a bunch of nuns. And when she's on the way, they're on the way to the cathedral to see the Saint Becket, you understand? Who was killed by Henry II. And on the way there, she says, I'll tell you a tale. And it's a tale of a boy, which is not Hugh of Lincoln, but she said, it reminds me exactly of Hugh of Lincoln. There was a boy in Asia Minor, and he was a nice little Christian boy, and then he wandered in the wrong neighborhood. The Jews got a hold of him and tortured him, and this, and that, and the other. And many Jewish boys and girls, I think there might be people in this audience, and others have been in college or once upon a time in high school, and they used to read all this sort of thing, and all the Christian kids in class are looking at them, and so forth. And I can tell you right now, when this is read, even today, and certainly in the late 20th century, the kids say like this, well, we know it's not all true. The teacher always says, it's not all true. So how much is true? 10%? At 20%? 5%? When you don't know, the average person says like this. They say, well, I don't know if it's all a lie, If I say you did something and so on and so forth, if I walked over to anybody over here and I said, this person did so-and-so to me or to you or whatever, even if it was pretty outrageous, you'd say, I don't know if I totally believe it, but I somewhat believe it. Or didn't the Chavetz Chaim write a book called Hilchos Lashon Hara about that, right? They say in the book, somebody says Lashon Hara, you're supposed to totally disbelieve it. Yeah, right. It's like when the judge says, the jury will, we all know how that works, yeah? No, but now that's all funny. This was, of course, not funny. And the cultural results in English culture, British culture, and American culture, English-speaking culture, has remained with us because the Prioress Tale of Chaucer and others is a what should I say, immortal classic of literature, and it is, and therefore always carries the poison, because what we really should be saying is, what kind of idiots were these people in England in the 14th century that they're appealing Baba-Mises, which even the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope says was a Baba-Misa. Nicht gesteugen and nicht gewollt never happened. And these idiots are talking about it like, look how credulous they were. No, you don't say it that way. Because you don't want to, what should I say, you don't want to insult Chaucer. You're too much of an angry Jew. Too much of that Semitic bile. It's a problem. Now, obviously, England has changed, of course. Although it didn't change, the major reason it changed, it went Protestant, to be perfectly honest. And the major reason the Protestants did was not the Church of England, the dissenters, the Oliver Cromwell types. They're the ones who busted all this stuff up. So just you should know, it doesn't help, but it's nice to know that in 1955, the Anglican Church put up a sign, which you can see here, I think. Is that the next one? Yeah. And you can read the sign where it says, on little used former shrine at Lincoln Cathedral. So this is a place where Englishmen have gone on pilgrimage for centuries. But 1955 is a decade after the Holocaust. And I would even go so far as to say the 50s was the best years in England as far as the Jews are concerned. You understand? That was the maximum non-anti-Semitism, if you want to get down closer. We'll talk about that later this year. And what does he say over there? By the remains of the shrine of Little U, trumped up stories of ritual murders of Christian boys by Jewish communities were common throughout Europe in the Middle Ages and even later. These fictions cost many innocent Jews their lives. Lincoln had its own legend. The alleged victim was buried in the cathedral. Such stories do not redound to the credit of Christendom. And so, Lord, forget us what we've been, amend what we are, and direct what we shall be. At least, it's good that somebody should go on the record and say that the whole thing's a lie. Right? It doesn't bring anybody back, but it's at least good that they should come out and say this. But the sad fact is, I don't know the demography of England at this moment. If there's a bunch of Muslims living in Lincoln, they probably took down the sign, put up and said, it really happened. Because, that's what's going on. The demonization of Jews associated with the blood libel charges became a staple of European culture and is currently being revived, as I said before. Thus, from the mid-1200s on, every time a Christian kid was missing, the Jews were in danger of being accused of kidnapping for the matzahs. This simply became part of Jewish life in Europe from the 1200s till Hitler's time. You get it? If a kid was missing and there are Jews in the community, you give it a day, maybe a little bit more, and then where is he? Where is she? And who saw what the Jews were doing? And if it happened around Pesach, if it happened in April time, forget about it. The Jews are doomed, whatever the Pope said. Which is why you have this terror of using red wine in the Seder. That's where it comes from. The Shulchan Aruch says, the Gemara says that the best wine is the red wine. It's more chashuv for the Seder. You're supposed to be like free people. But the Shulchan Aruch says, do not use red wine. Don't do it. And I remember I was a kid, and I made some kind of, as kids do, I told my father, we came from Eastern Europe, from Lithuania. I said some joke about, it looks like blood. He said, that's not even funny. Right? It's not even funny. Just like you don't make jokes about Auschwitz, it's not funny. You don't make jokes about this business because people got killed over this, and in terrible ways. So it is not funny, and it became part, therefore, of Jewish life. Again, there's a classic Jewish gallows humor type joke about this, which will speak better than anything I can say. And maybe you've heard it, and it goes like this. A girl is missing, the Jewish community freaks out, they're davening and shul, they're praying, they're all going to be doomed. And the guy runs and says, Baruch Hashem, the missing child was Jewish. It's funny, it's not funny. But you understand what I'm saying? That's a Jewish humor attempting to try to deal with it. You understand? And this was really true. If you think this stuff is wild, in 1924, in the state of New York, in Osceola, a Christian kid was missing on Erev Yom Kippur, and the police chief and somebody else, mayor or somebody, the police chief, and the mayor went to the rabbi, the reform rabbi of a small synagogue in Osceola. He says, "What can you tell us about this?" He says, "What are you talking?" And being that it was 1924, so, got in the papers, and the guy had to apologize, and so on and so forth. But it goes to show you, in upstate New York, which is not a backwards place too much, and, people have... Thank you, voice of Brooklyn. Manhattan has now spoken. But after all the jokes are over, there's public school. They're reading, people are literate. Are reading, and people are literate. It's a civilized place. It is. I understand all the jokes, but in reality, it's not the end of the world or something like that. And boy, you are real sophisticates over here. I'm telling you, I'm dealing with cosmopolitans. People. The point is, obviously, they picked it up with their mother's milk. Where'd they hear it? How'd they hear it? Where'd it come from? And you find phenomena like this elsewhere. What if no child is missing, though? And you want to kill the Jews because you owe money or whatever. What's the charge? Is no missing baby. In an atmosphere of demonization, you can't just leave the Jews alone. So what do you do? But what's the charge? Nobody's missing. The answer is the second of the two terrors and scourges that pop up in the Middle Ages. And that is what they call the host desecration. Let's move to the next one. Here's a painting, as you see over there. These are the little wafers, and the Jews are torturing them. Okay? And this is from a church in Passau. And I understand somebody can laugh at it, but you understand when I say don't laugh at it. It's not funny. They use wafers for the host, for the ceremony of the Mass. You give the faithful, we say we eat there's a whole machlokas. You hand it to them, they take it to whatever. He says, well, we have our things. So, wait a second. When you eat it, you say, I'm eating the body of Jesus. When drinking the wine, you're drinking the blood. Fine. If nowadays, when you buy crackers and wafers, they have preservatives, don't they? But no, it's not funny. In those days, of course, they didn't. And so I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but some of you are. Will red streaks, bacteria, and things like this appear on wafers? They will, molds of various types. Now, today you use science language. You call it a mold, you call it a this, you call it that. But you understand where I'm going. Somebody says this, especially incredulous people. Here's the wafer which you're about to eat represents the body of Christ. Literally. It's got red streaks on it. What's that all about? In the 13th century. Okay? It's blood. What blood? It's been tortured. Who tortured it? The Jews. Why would they do that? They know that it's really true. They know the wafer is what we say it is. They say they don't believe it, but really they do. And the Jews have this evil, witchy side of them, which is that if they could kill Jesus again, they would do it. And this is how they do it every day, or when they have the opportunity. Now, how do you defend yourself against a charge like that? What are you supposed to say? I know what a Jew would really like to say, so you guys mentally ill, but it's not funny. It's not funny if things happen as a result of it. And what's worse is, you don't need a dead body. You just need a rumor or a wafer with red stuff on it. Okay? And you understand, in a real Catholic culture, they carry ceremonial in the church, sometimes in the street. They take it very seriously. I don't know. Maybe. It's a pure guess on my part. Maybe there was some Jew or Jews who some stupid thing said, "Oh, there's a Jesus blood, and we killed him," or something like that. I mean, I hope I'm wrong about that, but it wouldn't surprise me because every Jewish community has this quota of stupid people, and I'm saying, and you can't make jokes about things like that. That's what I'm trying to get across. You can't make jokes about things when you live in such an environment. And I don't know that happened. It could have been it's totally made up on its own. All I know is it happened. And if you believe it, what could be more infuriating to a Christian? I mean, it doesn't get worse than that, right? It doesn't get more insults. What's the word? It's as infuriating as it can get. And so what was the result? In the late 1200s, when the emperor position was being fought over a bunch of different nobles, two of them, and there was a certain chaos, and there was nobody strong at the top, there occurs the Rindfleisch massacres of the summer of 1298. It was charged in a small town in Röntgen in South Germany, not far from in Bavaria, Franconia. It was charged that the Jews there desecrated a host. Who started? We don't know. All we know is all the Jews were killed. The mob immediately ran and killed all the Jews in the town. Wait a minute. At that time, as I told you, there was no strong Holy Roman Emperor. The contenders were fighting it out. That means local warlords, mob leaders can operate. Local police are not equipped to fight mobs any more than they are in Paris the other day to protect the synagogue. Some dude named Rindfleisch in Germany is a meat. Some dude named Rindfleisch claims God appeared to him in a vision and gave him permission to kill all the Jews. All the Jews. And so a mob gathers, and eventually a small army, and they rampage all over South Germany, and they wipe out entire Jewish communities. Würzburg, Rottenburg, Bamberg, Heilbronn, all these little communities that are famous in old days. Rottenburg is Rottenburg, the Red City. After that, the Jewish poets in the Piyutim write is this Ir Adoma Midam Odom. Rottenburg means it's red city, red from human blood. Okay? And they all become scenes of terrible massacres. The massacres are so vicious because they torture the victims so badly that the Jews often prefer to lock themselves in their own homes and synagogues and burn the place down. So it's not what even happened by Hitler, where he threw people in and burned the place. Here, the Jews prefer to do that rather than fall in the hands of the bad guys. So you see how unbelievably vicious they were. In the free imperial city of Nuremberg, which is the big city in that area, the Jews run to their fortress, and even the Christian citizens try to help them because they're good for the economy. But the mob overcomes the defenders, and they butcher the Jews on the 1st of August. And they kill the whole yeshiva. Nuremberg was a big Malkum Torah. The rabbi, there was one of the most famous rabbis of the Middle Ages, Mordechai. Some people familiar in the back of the Gemara is the Mordechai ben Hillel, which is a very important source. He was Ashkenaz. And the Mordechai is a wonderful sefer. They collect stories of Gedolim. And that's how you know what the halacha is. You know, the Gemara says this, the Gemara says that, and then he writes it there. But Rabbeinu Tam did this. And Rashi once did this, and somebody came and criticized, and Rashi answered that. Or Maharam Rottenberg once did this, and they asked him, it's against the Gemara. Rottenberg said, well, I do it for this reason. It's very much of an oral tradition. And it's a very important sefer. He, his wife, 5 kids, all just killed. Among the killed rabbis, we have very famous, interesting names, because the Jews of Nuremberg later on returned years later, and they started the tradition of the memoir book, in which they keep the names of all the martyrs, which they recite every Shabbos, not just at Yizkor, some of them every Shabbos. And among them are Rav Avram HaKadosh Ger Tzedek, the Hager Shenizgar B'Shnas Zam Hashem. This is already a movie. They had a person who was a Rav in Nuremberg. I mean, it's Ashkenaz. You'd think you can get more racist than that, super elitist, all the rest of it. And one of the rabbis is a Ger Tzedek. And I just read to you. Now, Ger Tzedek, by the way, is a high madrega. There's 3 levels of Ger. There's a Ger Tzedek, there's a Ger, and as I call it, So well, that's the truth. But the Ger Tzedek is like Ruth. You understand? They came out of pure conviction. You pray. Don't forget that. And they have someone else that they mention. Hagershin is Gai B'Shnas Zam Hashem. Someone who converts to Judaism, which anyway you're asking for a lot of trouble in the 1200s, during the year of the Rindfleisch massacres. So I don't know. We'll never know what the story behind that is. But if you're ever in the mood of writing a novel, right, or something, I mean, there it is. Why would somebody? But I mean, that's a Kiddush Hashem. I mean, that's a Ger Tzedek. That's like saying I'm converting to Judaism in 1943. Okay, I mean, look, why would somebody do that? We will never know. And 38 again. Here's another one. 38 Noshim Zekanis Valmonos. They attacked like we would say today an old age home, right? And they killed 38 elderly women. Ubahen Maris Richsa Hamispaleles Shel Hanoshim. right? She was the Zogerin, as they say. Used to have the shul, and used to have the lady shul next door. And they probably got like a certain hole in between. That's how they used to have in Ashkenaz. And by the way, this is male territory, and this is female territory. I don't want to get into it now, but it's very fascinating how they had Simchas Torah and other things. The men did it this way, and the women did it this way, and A cannot cross into B, and B can't cross into A. This was their territory. They had their own auctioning of honors and things like that. And who is leading the services? There's a lady that knows Hebrew well. She's standing over here, and she's seeing how far they are in the davening. Then she's, leading everybody else over here. They're up to Ashrei. Go, follow me. Ashrei Yishavei, they're up to Yishtabach, and so forth. So it's a very charming type of community. All killed. And why? Because of that. It's not funny anymore. It's not a cute picture. Worst of all, 146 kehillas were wiped out. 146. Between 5,000 and 20,000 Jews. So that means that they're all small communities, what we call Dorfsjuden, and that's how life was lived in general. And, well, I need not say any more. A few weeks after the massacre, the winner in the Emperor sweepstakes, Albert of Austria, shows up in Nuremberg. He executes Rindfleisch for killing the tax-paying Jews. But, not for hurting the Jews, for hurting my pocket. But the damage was already done, okay? So this is a Habsburg over here. He's only interested, he said Habsburg, he's only interested in his own pocketbook. Worst of all, it shows how little protection the state provides. They'll come later on and pick up one or two people if it's in their interest. But what happened to the Jews and who were killed and their property and all the rest of it, worst of all, the debts are dissolved. What happened to the IOUs is gone. It's a Hitlerian logic. This is the danger. What was I'm going to use this in a which I say ironic sense. What was the beauty of the Hitlerian logic? He said, if you kill them all, then you have to worry about them. He said, if you kill them all, that's a seductive evil. The Arabs dream of this at this moment. You just kill them all, then you don't have to apologize. You have to do anything. Hitler's problem was they only killed some. And here also he said they killed all the Jews in the area, then nobody have to feel bad about. And if I owed money, it's over. You see, the emperor might kill one or two people, and then the rest of the guy. So at the end of the day, was Rindfleisch a good guy or bad guy? If he owed $10,000 or more money over there, it was a good guy. That's rough, because that reflects a reality that's going to be the Jewish reality throughout the Middle Ages and even afterwards. Unlike the blood libel, neither emperor nor pope repudiates or ridicules the accusation that the Jews desecrate the host from time to time. Think about what I just said. He said, the Jews may not use blood libel, but the kind of stuff that I showed you before, that they kind of do. Right? There's in Paris attacking the Schultz, as you know. This means it can be raised at any time and at any place in Christendom, and it will. But that's something that we'll attack next time. Since there's a war going on, so I just want to end on the note. I know you all join me. All those guys that are fighting on the front lines. We're closed for tonight. So I guess we'll drop them, like I say, whoever's interested, in the shoulder. Oh, man. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. You're right.